Hello there. Professor Shadow here. Welcome to another episode of True Stories sent in from our viewers. This time we're talking about skinwalkers. True stories? I'll let you decide. Our first story is sent in by Jake, the Desert Hitchhiker. My name's Jake. I've driven trucks for nearly 12 years, hauling all kinds of loads through remote places in the middle of the night. I've seen my share of strange things on the road, but nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for what happened that night on the highway. It was around 3 a.m., and I was driving through the desert, somewhere near the Four Corners region. It was pitch black, not a soul in sight, just me and the hum of the engine. Out there, where the road stretches for miles, you start to feel like you're the only person in the world. Sometimes it's peaceful, other times it's just eerie. It was about 2 hours out from my next stop when I spotted something up ahead, a figure standing by the roadside, barely illuminated by my headlights. I figured it was a hitchhiker, and my first thought was, what the hell is someone doing out here at this hour? As I got closer, the figure became clearer, but something about it was off. They were tall, thin, dressed in dark, ragged clothes. They weren't moving, just standing completely still, with their head turned slightly, almost as if they were waiting for me. I slowed down, and as I got within a few feet, the hitchhiker suddenly turned their head toward me, and that's when I realized something was very, very wrong. Their face looked human, but it was almost like a mask, expressionless, blank, with eyes that didn't quite match the rest of their face. They seemed lifeless, hollow. I'll never forget how they moved when I pulled over. Instead of walking toward me normally, they sort of jerked forward, like they were trying to remember how to move, like they were mimicking how a human would walk, but not quite getting it right. Each step was slightly off, a little too slow, like a puppet on a tangled string. Every instinct in my body screamed, "Get out of there." So I slammed my foot on the gas, peeling out of there as fast as I could. As my truck sped off, I glanced in my rearview mirror, and my heart stopped. The figure was keeping pace with my truck, running alongside me with the same jerky, unnatural movement, their face now twisted into a horrible grin that stretched too far. As I watched in horror, their body began to shift, distorting into something unrecognizable. One moment, they looked human. The next, their limbs stretched out, bending in impossible angles, as if they were trying on different shapes, different faces. I pressed the gas pedal harder, the speedometer climbing, but every time I looked in the mirror, it was still there, shifting, twisting, following me. I must have driven for miles, barely daring to blink, my eyes glued to the mirror, praying it would disappear, and then, just as suddenly it had appeared, it was gone. When I finally pulled into the next town, I was shaking. I asked around, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. A few locals exchanged nervous glances and told me about skinwalkers, ancient creatures from Native American lore, known for taking on the form of humans or animals. They warned me that the desert was their hunting ground, and that travelers who crossed paths with them rarely made it out unscathed. I still drive the night shift, but I never, ever stop in that stretch of the desert anymore. And if I ever see a hitchhiker again, I'll be keeping my foot firmly on the gas. Thank you, Jake, for sending in that tale. Our next true Skinwalker tale comes from Aaron. Thank you for sending in your tale. My name's Erin, and a few years ago, some friends and I went on a camping trip in the southwest. We were a close group, me, my boyfriend James, and our friends Kevin and Sarah. We loved being outdoors, and this spot was deep in the forest, away from the noise and the light of the city. It was supposed to be the perfect getaway. Little did we know we were venturing into territory with a long history of unsettling legends. We set up camp and spent the day hiking, laughing, and just enjoying the quiet isolation. The night fell quickly in the forest, bringing with it an eerie silence that seemed to blanket everything around us. By the time we gathered around the fire, the only sounds were the crackling flames and the occasional hoot of an owl. It was some time after midnight, and we were just about to turn in when we heard a strange noise in the woods, a soft rustling, like something moving just beyond the tree line. We all went quiet, straining to listen, thinking it was just an animal, maybe a deer. But then we heard it again, a whisper, faint but unmistakable. Kevin. It was soft, like a voice carried on the wind. Kevin stood up, trying to see through the trees. Did you hear that? He asked, looking back at us. James nodded, his face pale. Yeah, I did. It sounded like you. Before I could say anything, Kevin stepped away from the campfire, disappearing into the shadows to investigate. We all called after him, but he was determined to check it out, probably thinking one of us was playing a prank. Minutes went by, and then we heard him again, or at least his voice. Help me. The voice sounded distant, but it was unmistakably Kevin's. Guys, over here. We looked at each other, confused. Kevin, where are you? James yelled. And then we heard Kevin's voice again, but this time it came from the opposite direction. Help, please. A chill ran down my spine. It sounded like he was moving in a circle around us, calling for help from every angle. But the weirdest part, the voice wasn't quite right. It was like Kevin's voice, but flat, emotionless, like someone was trying to imitate him, but hadn't quite figured out how. James grabbed his flashlight and started to follow the sound. But then Sarah let out a gasp, pointing towards the tent. There, curled up inside, was Kevin, sound asleep. He hadn't even left the campsite. Our blood ran cold. If Kevin was in the tent, who or what was calling to us from the forest? We huddled together, whispering frantically, trying to make sense of it. And then that's when it started again. The voices, but this time it wasn't just Kevin's voice. Now it was my voice, calling from the trees. James, Sarah, help me, please. The voice sounded exactly like mine, but there was something wrong with it, something hollow. And then Sarah's voice joined in, calling out from a different direction. And then James's. It was like an echo, each voice repeating our names, begging for help, coming from all around us. We were paralyzed with fear, too terrified to leave the circle of light. The voices grew louder, closer, until it sounded like they were right outside the tent walls, surrounding us, circling like wolves. We spent the entire night like that, huddled together, too afraid to even whisper, as our own voices called to us from the forest. By dawn, the voices had stopped, and an eerie silence had settled over the forest. None of us dared speak as we packed up, desperate to leave that place behind. To this day, none of us can explain what happened, but I later learned that we had camped near Navajo land, a place known for legends of skinwalkers, beings that can mimic the voices and faces of those they hunt. I don't know if I believe in skinwalkers, but I'll tell you this, I've never been back to those woods, and I'll never go camping that deep in the forest ever again. If your voice was called, would you go back? Let's move to our next Skinwalker tale. And this Skinwalker tale sent in from viewer David. Let's see his tale. My name's David. A few years ago, my family and I moved to a small farmhouse in rural New Mexico. It was an old place, but it had land, space for the kids to roam, and a quiet solitude that I thought would be perfect for us. For a while, that was. But after we'd been there a few months, strange things started to happen. It began with the sounds at night, animal noises echoing through the fields. At first, I thought they were just coyotes. We'd hear them yipping and yowling from time to time. But something about these sounds was different. They were off. Somehow, like they didn't quite match any animal I'd ever heard. It sounded almost like imitation, as if something was trying to mimic the howls, but didn't quite know how. Then we started seeing something moving around in the fields. At night, from the window, we'd catch glimpses of shadowy figure slinking along the tree line, watching the house. It never came close, just stayed there, half hidden by the trees, moving back and forth, almost like it was waiting for something. Every time I tried to get a good look, it would disappear, blending into the darkness. I tried to tell myself it was just an animal, maybe a stray dog or even a wolf. But in my gut, I knew something was wrong. One night, our dog, Max, started barking furiously, his eyes locked onto the field outside. He paced back and forth by the door, growling low in his throat, every hair on his back standing up. Before I could stop him, he bolted out of the door and sprinted into the darkness, barking like mad. We waited, listened to his barking fade into the distance, and then silence. I called for him, my voice echoing into the night, but he didn't come back. I grabbed a flashlight and went out into the field, my heart pounding as I scanned the darkness, calling his name, and then I saw it. Just beyond the reach of my flashlight, standing near the tree line, was Max, or at least I thought it was Max. But as I got closer, something felt wrong. He was standing perfectly still, not wagging his tail, not moving. His head was turned towards me, but his face wasn't right. It looked like Max's body, but the face, twisted, almost human-like, with eyes that seemed to stare right through me. I stumbled back, dropping the flashlight. My blood turned cold when I managed to pick it up again. He, or it, was gone, vanished into the shadows, as if it had never been there. I ran back to the house, locking the door behind me, too shaken to explain to my wife what I'd seen. The next day, we searched everywhere for Max, but he never came back. Over the next few nights, the sightings continued. We'd see the shape at the edge of the field, always just far enough away that we couldn't make out its features, but close enough that we knew it was watching us. And then came the voices. They started late at night, calling our names from the darkness, mimicking Max's bark, or even our children's laughter. Sometimes it sounded like my own voice, calling me out into the field. I'd lie in bed, paralyzed with fear, too afraid to open the door, knowing whatever was out there was trying to lure us into the night. Finally, I reached out to a local Navajo elder, someone my wife's family knew. When I told him what we'd been experiencing, he went quiet, his expression darkening. He warned us that what we were dealing with was no animal, but a skinwalker, an ancient creature from Navajo legend, known to mimic voices and shapes to lure people into danger. He told us to never speak to it, never respond, no matter what we heard. He blessed our home and gave us instructions to protect ourselves. but his parting words stayed with me. Once a skinwalker knows where you live, it doesn't forget. We followed his advice, and after a while the noises faded. The shadows stopped appearing in the field, but Max never returned, and to this day I'm haunted by the memory of that creature, that twisted thing that looked almost like my dog, standing in the field, watching me with those hollow, human-like eyes. We moved away not long after, and I've never been back. What do you think? Could that be true? Are skinwalkers real? Thank you once again for watching me, Professor Shadow. I do hope you enjoyed those tales. And if you have your own true story you'd like to send to me for me to read out, please go to my website and maybe I'll be telling your scary tale. See you soon.